I made a point here to thanking Francis for inviting me to present, knowing that we have very divergent views, or at least in my case, very divergent view with the general view on what is the certification structures in the Pacific. And also, I take the position of being in the office of most Pacific Islands, fisheries bodies dealing with this. That has been the basis of my job for many, many years. So the first thing for me is, as a non-English speaker, is understanding what we're talking about. It's understanding what we're talking about. What are we talking about when we talk about certifications? Always go to Cambridge. The process of earning an official document on the act of providing an official, or the act of providing an official document as proof that something has happened or has been done. Sounds, very official. So let's gonna separate the two types of certifications I'm gonna be speaking about. One are the officials. This is government driven, yeah? And they are necessary for market access. You cannot enter the border of a country if you don't have this document. The consignment that you're sending will be rejected. And then I'm gonna talk about the private certifications, which are business driven. They are not necessary for market access. Your product will not be rejected from the border if you don't have that. They may be important for market success, which is a slight different. The official ones, they unilaterally apply to consignments of fish imported to some countries, yeah? Where the exporting country, meaning us, Kathleen showed us that, massively, and this is a good thing to sometimes review the coffee report, the Sophia report that FAO does every 2 years. Fish, 80% of the trade of fish originates in developing countries and go to developed countries. So the market country says, I want to have a certification of the exporting country on issues around the sanitary aspect of seafood, yeah? Basically, it is safe to eat. Ergo, you eat it and you will not get sick. And we place that responsibility, the developed country, place that responsibility on you to provide that certification. Catch. It declares that the fish in that consignment was caught in compliance with the regulations that apply to the reality, RFMOs, national legislation, etc., etc. And then finally, origin, which is the nationality of the product. And after me, you're going to have Saurada, who's going to be speaking in more detail on the sanitary and on the origin. I'm going to take a bit on the catch. Okay. Of the sanitary certification, for years, the EU has imposed the highest element, the highest side there, the highest sort of a level of requirement. Distinctively, they don't only impose what is to be proven, but how is to be proven. They tell you how your competent authority, which is a word that starts on the sanitary side, you competent authority has to be structured. Because they say, if you want to export to us, you need to prove you are equivalent to us. So, Tuvalu needs to prove that they have systems equivalent of those of Germany, for example. Yep. And this applies to all players in the sector, the competent authorities, laboratories, and operators. Now again, not going to go in deep into this. We're just going to actually a book by FFA is just going to be published on this, and you will hear more from Saurada. Then, in these countries, in the producing countries, they need to be able to carry out inspections certifying that the requirements laid down by Europe have been applied in your country. Okay? That is what I was proving there. And it's the responsibilities of the producers to comply and the role of the authorities to certify, as in the definition of certification, that those conditions were applied. The health certification is important in the EU because the element of eligibility becomes a very important element here. And here's what and to explain eligibility, there's nothing better than a small animation. So, in your country, your CA, your competent authority, needs to have a registration of all of the food business operators and the national legislation. Then there is a process of approval, which applies to those operators in your national structure that want to have access to the European Union and can prove that they have equivalent systems. For our region, that is vessels, reefers, cool stores, ice factories, transporters, and of course, factories, if you have them. And then those, if they are approved, then they need to get listed with the European Union for the countries that are authorized, of course. So when the product arrives to the border inspection post, the origin, not only in terms of country, but also in terms of the establishment in which this come, is in the system. This applies to fisher vessels, to reefers, to cool stores, and to factories. So this is what happens in your country. What happens in the EU, we have DG Santé, which is the authority that they have for sanitary issues. So the listing that you produce goes to them, while this list stays in your country, because they're going to come and they're going to audit you to see if you're doing this. So the EU processes and updates all the list, and they send it to the border control post, which is the new name, no border inspection post. And then you have the market. So the little fish there gets a certificate for every consignment, even if you are an authorized country and the consignment originates from an approved establishment. Every time it goes, a health certificate is created. So the fish gets to the border control post, and there may or may not be submitted to inspection, depending the risk profile of your country, and enters the market. Okay? So the health certification over the last decades, more countries have started requiring them. Yet they are not as strict as the EU. And we have on this, either countries don't need to be officially authorized, as is in the case of the USA. However, I just got some news that it's changing. Or the responsibility, in this case, the responsibility is only on the importer in the US to source that information. China has kind of like a copy the European system, but they don't really impose it. Japan is going through the process because normally they didn't have anything associated to that, and Korea is going through a similar process again. Anyway, okay. As I say, that will be Saurara's task, not enviable task. Catch certification, again, was the EU that started the system in 2010, and we heard Kathleen talking about this today. The regulation 1005/28 was strict on two components. One was the issue of the definition of cooperating and not cooperating countries and the red cards and yellow cards that we explained today, but the other on the establishment of a catch certification scheme. So it goes around the principle that the flag state is responsible and should certify the legality of catches, yet generally ignores coastal state. For example, we have foreign vessels established in the region for decades, Yeah, yet it's the flag state the one that has to certify the product, which is great in principle because that is under UNCLOS as we saw today. But operationally, yeah, it's much harder. So recently, not so recently, but in comparison with the EU, the US started with its own system, the US SIMP, for very few species. And again, it's a very interesting change that just came yesterday, that the US is going to start imposing. Well, NOAA is bringing this to a review, but who knows what's going to happen with the present government. So this is for very few species and places the responsibility on importers in the US and does not require state bodies validation. So in principle, they do not require anything from the government. Yep, that's it. It's the importer who has to decide. If the government has something, great. Otherwise, it's not required. Anyway, Japan keeps delaying the start of their own system, similarly to the EU, but even for a few species. And the key issue is there is no standardization among them. Yep. So, again, not going to go into all the details, but I took the job to compare what is the requirement of the EU exclusive, they're the blues, of the US exclusive are the oranges, and the ones that are shared. Yep. So, if you export for both, you have to create both systems. Yep. One are deeper than the other ones. We can talk about the EU changed its own one for now. It's going to start in 2026, take place, and incorporate some of the criticisms that people like me have done in the past. Again, however, there's still no harmonization. So, again, it's a bit of a nightmare. Great for the consumer, I assume, if that makes sense for them, but for the people sitting in these tables that are at, an office in a Pacific Island country, not a good thing. The official certification's ideal process for both happens, and I'm going to delve a bit later in my last presentation about what happened in country and what happens outside the country. So we have our value chain, very simple, in our country, the export, the authorities. So fish as food, sanitary, vessels have a regulatory verification, are inside of analysis and determination structure of monitoring for residues, etc., which has to be done by a lab that has an official accreditation. Then landing sites get involved in, processor gets involved on that, all this information is collected and manage it, and then on top of that you have a monitoring plan over the whole value chain, and then if everything is okay, they get certified, gets to the authorities in the European Union, either in paper or through e-certification, more and more on the sanitary side through a program called Traces, is e-certification, and the fish gets in. On the fish as fish side means the catch certification. We control vessels, mostly. Through the port state system, we may or may not control the unloading of these fishes. However, there is, or in principle, there should be a process of regulatory verification that joins there, sometimes in the same body, sometimes in different bodies. The health side tend to be with the Ministry of Health, but in many cases with fisheries for fisheries exports, and then fisheries tend to be with fisheries. So, boom, that is the ideal system. Now, are the certification working? The justification was based on the nefarious estimate that 20% of the seafood in the world was IUU caught, and this is go back to 2009. Yep. So if the catch certificates effectively eliminated fish for entering the market, then we will see a change in the trade patterns since it came into force. We will have seen a reduction of the fish entering those markets, which we didn't see. We prepare for you in 2014, a DG Mari study we did found that with the information used, the results showed that no impact in trade and relationship with the IUU regulation was detected. Of course, they blame us. Similar conclusion was found by a foreign NGO study in 2017. For the US, no detectable changes has been in trade patterns. So, either some new fish goes there, or the illegal fish just goes somewhere else. Or the system is not working, your choice. And the American one does not involve any fisheries authority. That's on the side, I keep repeating that. So, then we have the certification of origin. And again, Sarah is going to develop a bit, I just wanted to present it. It's not really a fisheries certification. Yeah, it has something to do with customs and trade departments of Chamber of Commerce. And it has to do, the origin is the economic nationality of the goods that we are dealing with. The origin determines which duties apply to the market when it enters the market of access. And the rules of origin that apply to each country are not identical in all cases because different levels of development take place, you know, if you are a less developed country, if you are not, if you are part of a trade agreement, you're not, etc., etc. But the key concepts here are the goods wholly obtained in your country, are they sufficiently transformed in your country, and there is a value-added rule. You need to compare the customs value of the materials not originating in your country. Again, very political and complicated. So, and then we have, to make it even worse, we have the unfortunately named Fisheries Certificate of Origin by the Americans, who has to do with dolphins. Has nothing to do with origin. And we get hammered with, so I'm not going to ask, like, we have to fill the certificates. Yeah? And again, as soon as you read it, this is mostly done for the problem they had with dolphin captures on the Eastern Pacific. Here it drops here. And it was the origin as well of, perhaps for me personally, the more nefarious of all the private certification, which was the dolphin safe one, which basically become a racketeering scheme where either you pay it or they're just going to manifest in front of your company or your country. So, a certificate must be declared for every imported shipment signed by the exporter and not by the official body. And you start seeing a trend here, right? You know, basically, all of this is either because they don't trust you or they don't care about your job. So, then we have the private certifications. The industry private certification has exploded over the last 3 decades, yeah, and become establishment in international fish trade and marketing. And mea culpa, our fault, we gave them the space because we didn't put our shit together. Yep. Scores of certifications overlap, compete, and sometimes contradict one each other. Establishing how they work, what they cover, who operates them, and how robust can the standards be is time-consuming and sometimes an impossible task. And I kind of know because I was involved in this publication, which we identify and describe 87 different private certifications applying to fisheries and aquaculture. And thus, this not started involving the newest ones, which are the labor ones. Okay? So, the private ones. The existing is based on establishing doubts about the regulatory frameworks, mostly in developing countries, that are not considered to achieve the desired outcomes as judged by the developed countries. Yep. There is some work, I just wanted to make it short, but there is some work, if you're interested in that, in seeing how many of the certifications actually are in those countries where they originate the need of these certifications. Yeah. At this stage, we work on 3 areas. The one that certifies good manufacturing practices around food safety and quality, which overlap with the national ones to be able to export the product in any case. The most well-known is British Retail Consortium, BRC, and I'm sure maybe Saurara can help me with some of the other ones we have, BRC, and there's just a whole host of them. So basically, you need to comply with everything that you need to do nationally, and on top of that, you have to pay someone to come and evaluate you, for you to also be certified against other standards that they put for you to access the market. Their market, not the market, their market. The ones that certify sustainability and responsible fisheries management, and Francis talked about them, and the ones that certify labor standards. So, and all of this system work under 3 models. First labeling, first party, self-declaration regarding adherence to own standards. Yes, some groups have done that, so this is our standards. Second party, established by industry association for their members, products, internal audits, procedures, and audit by external certified companies. And the third party labeling, which is the one that Francis presented in the case of the MSC. Independent certification, internationally neutral organizations. Now, I was working with FIO back in 2009, and we worked on this little seldomly found document where we basically analyzed this whole process, and we went about what was told about the theory of change and the belief that market-based approaches by NGO, frustrated with the perceived inability of regulators globally to mitigate problems, will affect change for the better, and that those labeled will get premiums for their products. Yet, as in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, there is no clear evidence of a long-term presence of these price premiums occurring to producers to markets that are likely to be more secure, assured, or new markets. And I worked in FAO, we conducted this research, and we found that retailers, not consumers, were pushing these private certifications. For that, it's just to avoid then NGOs going to their headquarters and going, yeah, you are contributing to the decay of the world, etc., etc. Interesting, when I started working at FIO, it was 2008, and we had the 4 last economic crises, and there were some studies that were looking at what make consumers choose seafood. And it was a list. At the top was, on the good days, before the economic crisis, at the top was food safety, then there was sustainability, then there was eco-labeling, etc., etc. 2009, after the economic crisis, at the top was food safety, second was price, and so the sustainability went down the hill. Yep. Producers are the ones who assume the bulk of the cost of certification, and as such, there is a conflict of interest. Yep. You are paying for a result. You're not going to go into the system when you do a certification. And again, to be able to understand the system, I took the effort of qualifying as an evaluator for the MSC. And I did one, what they call it, pre-certification. So you pretend to do the audit of a certification in order to see how far you are from reality, so you help the company prepare on the areas that they don't know, they don't need it. And that was for one of the biggest tuna certifications in the Pacific. In any case, the origin of the movement assumes that fisheries and now labor administrators, especially in developed countries, are not performing adequately. And this is to an extent true. However, fisheries and labor administration in the Pacific, and I know because I've been involved with those days, and I know many of you have, we spent 2 or 3 days, literally 2-3 consecutive days, with the consultants that Francis talked that come to do the evaluation, sitting in our office, and we are responding to the questions. So, and they are asking us, who they in principle don't trust, for the information they need to get the certification. Essentially, they seek data from the people and institutions they don't trust, in principle. The irony for me is astonishing. Yeah? If you want to help, why not support the official institutions that this country is responsible for addressing these issues are part of the job? He talked about, $500,000, $100,000 to $100,000, $500,000. One of the companies I used to work as a fisherman, and then I got involved as a consultant for more than 2 decades now, which makes the best canned tuna in the world. And you can buy it here, and we all know what it is. No, I don't want to shame the company. However, their budget for certifications is $180,000 a year. The budget for preventable diseases for the provincial administration where this company is based is $60,000 a year. If I was a European consumer, I would be scandalized about that last figure, not about the first one. So, what, in my opinion, the systems create is a parallel system. So, let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say that in Waihekeland, where I live, is a country. We thought about Waihekset separating us from New Zealand. We like the model that the Cook Islands have, but wait, that's a different discussion. Let's say we separate us out, and the driving is terrible. We crashed into each other. There's a lot of people dead, blah, blah, blah. So, people go, this guy's hell. Great. So what I'll do is I'll go there and see what is the problem. Is the problem the training of fisheries, of drivers? Is the problem the roads? Is the problem the driver certification process? You get it, the driving's license. Is the licensing a problem? Is the problem that we all corrupt and, so what is the problem? Once we identify the problem, which is what the development industry, in a very colonial way, tried to do, once we identify the problem, we help. Now, what I would not do is to get Stephen there to get his driver's license to the domestic process and then pay a second licensing so he can drive rich people who wants to feel better about his driving. Good. Why can a fishery be eco-labeled? The promoted version is that a fishery is sustainable because it has a certification. But it's the opposite. A fishery is sustainable because the action of concerned governments and FMOs, and therefore it can be obtained an eco-label as long as the industry pays, of course. Yeah, you all know this. This is us. Yeah, it's all in the green. Well, let's don't talk about the bycatch species. But you're not buying bycatch species, you're buying tuna. We can argue about that. But it's all in the green. So every one of you does a relatively good job. We have SPC, we have FFA, we have this, we have that. We pretty much in between PNG and Kiribati, there is more tuna caught in their waters than in the whole Indian Ocean. Yep. And so we do severe volume. So an example that we discussed many times. We go in Majuro, we go to do our boarding inspection, and there is one carrier with two personas. Both fish in the same ocean, with this, under the same regulatory system, with the same observers, with the same control, with the same MCS, with everything is the same. Yet one pays for the eco-label, the other one doesn't. Therefore, one is sustainable and the other one is not. Furthermore, in the sustainable one, half the boat is out of fat sets, which cannot be certified because they are not sustainable. But if it wasn't, I say half because I'm very generous. Normally it will be 3/4. So without those fat sets, that vessel will not be fishing. That was called, a few years ago, compartmentalization. And MSC was challenged about that. So after 2 years of playing around, they took on board and they say, okay, we're going to make a change. And the companies have 3 years to implement it. 3 years. And now we have fat fisheries that are certified. I don't think there is much tuna that is not certified at the moment, which to an extent is great, but then where's the premium if everyone is certified? So do you pull out self-existence, which is in principle the idea. Yep. So anyway, do eco-labels guarantee non-IUU fish? There was a paper that came a couple of years ago where pretty much that's what they insinuate. So I went to the list of authors, and of the 10 authors, 9 worked for MSC, and the other one was the husband of one of the authors. So, in FFA countries, the legality of the catches is verified by the Port State Measure System prior authorizing unloading, and we're going to talk about this later on. We check identity, licensing, maneuvering, and it's the same for vessels that pay or the vessels do not pay the certification. The assessment does every 5 years, 3 years, depending on the fishery. One of the components, as Francis say, is Principle 3, which is the regulatory side, which is you are fishing under the system. Yeah. One of the issues I had when I did the pre-assessment is that because I have access to, under my other hat, I have access to FFA data. Of those 32 vessels we had in the certification of unit, we had 6 that were and the compliance index -5. That is the worst level of compliance we have in FFA. Yet I could not use that data in the certification because that data wasn't provided by the client or by the government of that client. So there is where my doubts went ballistic. So, on the determination of legality, remember that the fish does not become illegal in the factory. The fish is caught illegally. So the way we deal it is from port entry to port entry, yeah, or from unloading to unloading. So to say that something is legal, it's not IUU in the period of 5 years. And it's, it's the Unis, it's the Wasis, it's the Stephen of this world who certify the legality of the unloadings. It's not the consultants, or it's not the eco-labels. Anyway, my point is that the fight against IUU happens at sea and in port normally by people who don't get any benefit from eco-label fish. And don't start me with there is a very telling graph of SPC that because in our region, for one of our biggest certified fisheries, the observers have a role on the separation of fish from free school to fat. So that takes time. And it came at the cost of sampling, biological sampling. Since this started, the biological sampling went down. Yeah, of course, they get paid a few dollars more. How much is the difference in between for an observer from MSC to non-MSC? $5, yeah, for a big part of the day. So, now, interestingly, I started reading about it more and more. And there is a lot of research that point that this can be seen as neocolonialism. Yeah. The territorial practice in the certification standards replicate aspects of the legal extraterritoriality, English, sorry, of the colonial period. So we make the rules, but you apply it. Huh? We are on Queen's Road. Yeah? This new form of extraterritoriality creates a disregulated, variegated, beautiful word, sovereignty scapes around what we do. Yet, the key features, I'm going to fight here, man. The key features include the identification of subjects that need protection, we, or at least in my case, half of me. A narrative that speaks local states as inadequate for providing these protections, and the creation of territories where imperial state provide this protection. We are helping you here, you know? So, and become certification agencies of the transnational eco-certification. Ah, look, my fishery, and this is in between our countries, my fishery is better than you one. So we get, you know, we have the white man label there. Okay, so, do I have a better option? Because it's something that I get really pissed off is when people criticize, but doesn't often help. Yep. My perspective, and this is totally personal, everything I say today, other than the certification side, is my take. It has nothing to do with any position by BMU or with anything. So this is my take, and what I appreciated, and the reason I came here is because we started from the first day as this is university. And university is still one of those places where you can say something and be challenged for it. Yeah? So if you don't think that what I'm saying is right, please, please, please challenge me. So my take is, if these labels, the eco labels, the other ones, really represents the wishes of the consumers, which, look, my mother-in-law is from Holland. Yeah? I went to a market with her, and she had this, oh, where's that tuna from? That's from Sri Lanka, because they have little flags. And where's that other one? That's from the Maldives. I wouldn't touch the tuna with a stick. It didn't look good. But she knew, no, there was Myanmar. And in Myanmar, they had, issues with human rights. So she chose the Sri Lankan one, because I also work in Sri Lanka, and she knew that I was there, and that after the tsunami, some of the people I knew died. So she was happy to pay, €2 more for a equally bad tuna. So I thought, they have a point. So there is a point there. However, why the eco-labels then don't fundraise from the consumers, consumer organizations, etc., and when a fishery wants to get certified, they present the scope, and the eco-labels organization tender the assessment to certifying bodies, yeah, and the ones with the best combination of skills and price gets the job, which is what we consultants do. We tender to projects for a common good, and then they choose the one with the combination. So for me, they don't have to change anything, just who pays. Because that, no conflict of interest, the massive cost does not fall on the companies, which will recover that from the employees. They're not going to recover that from the market. They're going to recover it from the employees, the cost of certification. And then it's up to the fishery to decide if they want to get this private review process or not, as Iceland is doing, with consequences, but they're still getting strong. So, in synthesis, official certification are conditions for market access from a regulatory perspective. And this is the one we need to focus. Private certification schemes have no relevance from a regulatory perspective regarding market access. Private certification have become a condition for business with the EU, the USA, but it's not a regulatory mandate. Now, the EU and the USA are markets of, let's say, 700 million, 800 million people. Yep. 500 million for Europe, 300 million for the US, more or less. Let's give it more, 1 billion people. How many are we? 7 billion. We're pampering to a minority. The certification are a business condition that may be sorted in between buyers and vendors. While many authorities in developing countries worldwide need help in providing meaningful official guarantees, ignoring them in favor of commercially driven private certification based on a conflict of interest only benefits some. And I think Francis was very specific on that. For me, that can be seen. This whole thing can be seen as best as hypocrisy. Because their fisheries, they need to fish here because their fisheries are gone. And neocolonialism because they know better. So, my take. Again, I don't know anything. The last one I want to say is that the other issue, and I just touched on something that I didn't put it here because something that Rafael says, this whole system is based or pushed towards the voluntarization of requirements that are very specific in international legislation. You have to manage your fisheries, since UNCLOS to here, and your courses. And then you as a flag state are responsible for the people on board to put that, to tertiarize that due diligence. For me, is a no-no. So yeah, I just wanted to perhaps offer another view. Thank you.